I am a university graduate, having attended this great institution like the majority of the people on the stage with me tonight. And I keep hearing about all of these advances in STEM, people who have influenced the course of humanity over the course of their careers. And I can't help but think, where were you people when I needed help with trig homework? I mean, all in the same room. Jeff, I'm even in high school. I don't know what happened. I'm going to begin with a list for a moment. The Ethical Humanist Award from the New York Society for Ethical Culture. Hero of the Year Award from the American Heart Association. General H. Norman Schwarzkopf Action Award. And the Award for Tobacco Control from the World Health Organization. Those are just a few of the accolades our final Distinguished Alumni Award honoree has received. Three-time UB alumnus Jeffrey Wigand fought a one-man battle against big tobacco in the 1990s when he publicly contradicted the industry's, that is, his employer's, reports on the dangers of smoking. You may recall his story, which was portrayed in the movie released in 1999, The Insider, starring Russell Crowe. Well, on August 5th, 1995, Jeffrey made his case to the public during an episode of 60 Minutes. And then, after a lengthy court battle, the lawsuit was dismissed as a condition of the historic $368 billion, with a B, $368 billion settlement between the attorneys general of 40 states and the tobacco industry. Today, Jeffrey is still lecturing and consulting around the world to educate the public on the dangers of tobacco, and while running a nonprofit organization he started called Smoke-Free Kids. Thank you, Jeffrey, and congratulations.
I guess, first of all, I have to disclaim everything that he said because it's inaccurate. I do not accept the moniker as a hero. I believe I did what other people would have done. Much of my life today revolves about what I've done in the tobacco-held accountability arena. But I have to go back to when I got here at UB in 1967. I came to UB after spending 4.5 years overseas. And I came back to the United States at that time in a very tumultuous environment. I was a Vietnam vet. I ran an operating room, Central Sterile Supply, for the Flight Surgeon's Office in not only Japan, but also in Southeast Asia. And I came to Buffalo wanting to be an orthopedic surgeon. That's all I wanted to be. I wanted to be able to use the skills I had seen in the operating room, in the operating theaters, in a war zone, and take it and use it ultimately to improve lives, make the quality of life better, and to save lives. I have to thank many, many people, because when I came back, it wasn't for people like Keith Wellman and Kurt Hare, who gave me a laboratory to be an NSF fellow to get my undergraduate degree. Then on to a master's degree with the support of Roswell Park, and people like Thomas Aceto, Margaret McGilvery, Roy Sloan White, and many people at Roswell Park who helped me go through the process of not only my master's degree, but also my PhD degree. I spent most of my time when I was here at Children's Hospital in the basement, isolating human transcortin. I also, at the same time, ran the operating room at 11 to 7 shift for Lady Victory Hospital in Lackawanna. And those folks let me study, they let me work, and also allowed me the time to sleep as I continued to try to go out of here as quickly as possible. What I learned here really became the underpinning of things I did long before 1993. I left here, I got my first job working for a German company in Germany because I was fluent in German. And I developed a business for them with fine biochemicals that actually were used for clinical diagnostics in a laboratory. So when you got your blood glucose done, much of that work was what I did. Developed a pregnancy test. So I got to use much of the science that not as a biochemist that I learned, but the ability to learn new things as I continued to go forward in my career. Then I moved from Boehringer Mannheim to Pfizer, and then from Pfizer to Merck, and then to J&J. And each time I rose up in the ranks of senior management. And each time I was faced with new and different technology in order to manage it. And ultimately, with Revline, I was responsible for a $280 million business and turning it around in clinical diagnostics. Left Revlon and went overseas to Japan, back to Japan, and built this wholly owned subsidiary that was in the nuclear medicine business. That business shut down. I came back, and I was offered an opportunity to go to work for a tobacco company, to be the head of research and development, something I had never done, but to take a research organization that was empirically based and make it scientifically based. But first and a priority was, how do I take all these skills I amassed over 35, I would say, successful years, to take a product, when used as intended, not only killed its user, but the innocent bystander. I also have to say that as I went through the recruiting process, it took me 9 months to make a decision that I would be leaving the healthcare industry and pharmaceutical industry that I grew up in to go to the other side. I was paid well. My salary was in excess of $500,000 a year. I got to move my family out of the New York City area to Louisville, Kentucky, where my daughter's grandparents were. One was chief of surgery, the other was chief of pediatrics. And when I did the calculus, I said, wow, I got the benefit of it. I could save lives. I could make a safer cigarette. And I actually did. I could put my family closer together. Could get the better healthcare benefits for my one daughter. But as I got there, I started to learn that the company had an internal mantra versus an external mantra. Things I saw, things I observed, things I had never seen in the 25 plus years I had spent in the healthcare pharmaceutical industry. I saw lawyers destroy documents. I saw scientists that worked for me actually smuggle out of the country a genetically engineered tobacco that had 12% nicotine content on a weight basis. I saw the lawyers involved in altering science, something that was very much the fabric of me. And actually, I spent 4 years and 3 months basically swallowing a mistake I had made until August of 1992. The industry uses 600 plus additives to intensify the addictive process and make it easier for children to become addicted. There are 4,000 children per day in this country that have their first tobacco product at the average age of 11 to 12. Average age 11 to 12. The girls are targeted more on the idea of thinness, and boys are targeted more on robustness and adultness. But the additive that they use had been banned by the Food and Drug Administration in 1954. It was hepatotoxic. It was toxic to the livers of dogs. But the company continued to use it in spite of declaring to the public that it used all FDA GRAS-approved additives. Food and Drug Administration generally recognized as safe additives that were never intended to be pyrolyzed or combusted. Such additives as toilet bowl cleaner, car antifreeze, chocolate, honey, licorice, and coumarin. Coumarin is a sweet additive that is much like the essence of vanilla. It's added to tobacco because it mutes the normal reflexive that the respiratory system has in choking. In 1992, I received a draft copy of a national toxicology program that had now evaluated coumarin in test animals, that it was a lung-specific carcinogen in both male and female animals tested. I'm not a toxicologist, but I hired a toxicologist to work for me while I was at B&W. And so I did all my calculations, and I had Scott do his calculation and give it back to me. And his numbers and my numbers were the same. I then went to the CEO of the company, who I worked for, who I had many run-ins with, over ethical and legal issues, and told him that this additive now has incremental information that needs to be removed immediately from the product, such as not to put people in further harm's way. He told me to go back to the laboratory and got my people find a substitute because it was his decision whether to leave it in or not. Because if he took it out, it would change the flavor of the product and therefore affect profits. Well, by August of '92, I about had it. My daughters were in private schools. They were coming home and asking me, "Dad, how come the job that you do kills people?" I had problem looking in the mirror, understanding that I was a bystander in a fraud. A fraud on children, a fraud on the public, a fraud on the courts. And I decided to write the infamous memo. I wrote the memo and sent it to Sandifer, and Sandifer then summarily fired me for having poor communication skills. They wanted me out of the building immediately. They wouldn't let me take my personal belongings. They had the police escort me from the building. The next day, I received my passport, my kids' pictures, and my personal belongings delivered to my home. I would not sign the termination agreement they gave me because they owed me more. I tried to find a lawyer in the state of Kentucky to represent me against the tobacco industry on contract law, and I couldn't find one. In June of 1993, I settled out the agreement. I got my continued severance package. I got no offset of future salary earnings. I got the critical health benefits I needed for my daughter, and I was a fat cat. I was finished with my experience with the tobacco industry. What did I do with what I knew? What was my responsibility and accountability to the knowledge I had? And I didn't have an epiphany, as it may seem in the movie. It took some while. I started working for CBS 60 Minutes in 1994, reviewing documents that they wanted to make an investigative report on. I met Mike Wallace and Lowell Bergman and many of the people at 60 Minutes, and I built a relationship. And many of the documents I saw in doing the work for 60 Minutes had names on it and people I sat across from in meetings that could have developed a fire-safe cigarette in 1964, which would have saved 1,200 lives a year, but they put it on a shelf because they weren't required by litigation and or by law to produce it. It was called Hamlet, to burn or not to burn. And that irritated me. It really bothered me. It bothered me that they were so callous that they would only do something that was jammed down their throat by a law. And I continued getting involved. I worked covertly with the Food and Drug Administration. My code name for the Food and Drug Administration, teaching David Kessler the science of tobacco, was research. I was contacted by Henry Waxman to help the Congress interrogate the 7 CEOs. I refer to them as the 7 dwarfs. I've gotten in trouble for that, but I continue to. And then I got to review 7 JAMA articles by Professor Stan Glantz, a cardiologist at UC San Francisco, who had received the cache of documents from the very company I worked for that were part of what's called the Deadwood Files. And those documents, as I read them, were documents I'd asked to say, how do you test, what level of nicotine do you need to addict? How do you target children? What additives fortify addiction? How do you use sugars to increase the nicotine addiction? And I decided after reading those articles and authenticate them that I would actually go to CBS 60 Minutes and violate the agreement I had signed after receiving 2 death threats on my children, telling CBS 60 Minutes and 40 million people what the tobacco industry knew and didn't tell its consumers. And that my life since then changed dramatically. I was sued. I had 2 Secret Service agents provide 24/7 armed support. They took me to school. They started my car in the morning. They took my girls to Girl Scouts, took me to go to the store. And things continued on. I got involved with the attorney generals who actually started suing him, first in the state of Mississippi, Florida, Texas, New York, etc. That ultimately was sealed as $368 billion, $300 billion in terms of repayment of Medicare expenses associated with sick smokers. It costs us roughly about $200 billion a year in healthcare costs for treating non-smokers, and another $168 billion in lost workforce productivity associated with smokers and illness. Settled out on June 20th, 1997, and part of the final agreement was I was released from the lawsuits by Brown and Williamson. And since June 20th of 1997, I have tried to use the science I learned here and continue learning, and the ethics and the integrity of my major professors here that I mentioned before, to actually change the lives of children around the world. If I can prevent 1 child a day, or the 3,000 a day to start, of not picking up that first tobacco product and not being duped with it, I have basically accomplished more in doing what I have done than I'd ever have done as a physician. I have relied many, many times on my education and what I learned here. I've gone back to school 3 times since I left here. I mean, the education I got here was very substantive. And I have to say, when I came back from Vietnam, I wasn't a very happy camper. 1968. And it wasn't for Keith Wellman and Kurt Hare allowing me to have a laboratory, get me to be an NSF fellow. I don't know what I would have done. So I have many people to thank. I have people that made my life, when I came here this week, very comfortable. David, Mary, and Eric, who've generously shuffled me around. I owe a lot of debt of gratitude to the 153 students I was teaching during the most tumultuous time of this. To the lawyers at the Department of Justice that stepped in harm's way to protect me. So when you hear somebody say that I'm a hero, I'm not a hero. I don't accept that moniker, nor never will do. I believe what I did was right, and I don't believe anybody should ever be a bystander. When they see a harm, they need to follow the categorical imperative, or the golden rule, or Mill's philosophy, and actually do something. I'm very grateful for where I am today. When many people thought I wouldn't survive, I've succeeded. Thank you.